From the unexplained to the mundane, come join us on a journey to the fringe. Hello and welcome to Journey to the Fringe, where you are listening to the most environmentally friendly way to listen to us orate, unless you're like in the same house as us. But I don't think those people listen to us.
I don't think so.
So hey, look at you. We are your orating podcast hosts, Taylor and Chelsea, here today to finish up what I think is technically a 3-part series. I think that's at least how you're putting it out there, Chelsea.
If I'm counting it correctly, then yeah, we're on the same page.
Yeah, and I guess
great.
I'll just let you take that over. And this is the longest we've gone between episodes of the parters in a series.
It is. So if you'll remember back on the last episode, we were covering the Mothman. Originally, I said this was going to be 2 episodes, and now we're on the 3rd. So I think I'm going to cover everything and end it all this episode. We'll see where it takes us. I cut the Mothman Prophecies episode right down the middle to make it an enjoyable experience for all of us. And if you recall last week, as I just said, again, because I like to say things over and over, we were discussing some of the themes of the book. So today we're picking back up at more themes, which is hypnosis is the first one we're up with. Let's just start right off with a quote from the book. The contactee syndrome is a fundamental reprogramming process. No matter what frame of reference is being used, the experience usually begins with either the sudden flash of a light or a sound, a humming, buzzing, or beeping. Subject's attention is riveted to a pulsing, flickering light of dazzling intensity. He finds he is unable to move a muscle and is rooted to the spot. What is really happening? The percipient is first entranced by a flickering light. From the moment he feels paralyzed, he loses touch with reality and begins to hallucinate. The light remains a light, but his or her mind constructs something else. This can be compared with normal hypnosis. In quote, Keel says he has been an amateur hypnotist for many years, and bracket, that was a bracket.
This guy had a lot of hobbies.
He really did. A hypnotized subject very often thinks he is fully conscious, that the hypnosis isn't working and he is just going along with the hypnotist. But when he tries to move or disobey a command, he is surprised to find he can't. The paralysis reported in so many UFO cases is really a form of hypnosis. End quote. He goes on to connect rhythmic lighting associated with UFOs as well, not only sightings, but also from contactees who are on board the craft. So that's his thing with hypnosis. Another interesting theme in the book is mimics. I really like this topic. Keel explains, quote, the phenomenon is imitative. This paranormal mimicry is difficult for many to understand, but I come across constant examples. Early in January 1973, for instance, a reliable witness in Ohio observed an unusual-looking helicopter, which she was able to describe in detail. When she sketched it for a local UFO enthusiast, he was flabbergasted. Does that sound right to say it that way?
Enthusiast? I see no other way of saying that word, Chelsea.
Okay. He was an aeronautical engineer specializing in helicopters, and he knew the thing she drew was a new secret helicopter that was still on the drawing board. Even closer to home, a few days after Tad Jones, we're talking about Tad Jones, by the way, he had a sighting on Route 64. A few days before his sighting on Route 64, True magazine hit the stands with an article of mine about flying saucers. It was illustrated with drawings of all kinds of odd-shaped objects, many of them the pure products of the artist's imagination. It included an exact replica of Jones's sphere that he witnessed, complete with wheeled legs and propeller. An object exactly like this had never been described in the UFO literature before or since. The artist had produced his layout weeks before. Somehow, the phenomenon had mischievously duplicated the artist's conception for Jones's benefit. So that's kind of a cool, I didn't put some stuff that I thought I had put in here, but I think it kind of comes up in a second, right after this one. I'm not sure why I broke it up like this, but here we go. You're gonna like this one. Another thing that I thought was interesting was Keel's observations of the roles of crossroads and LEYS in high strangeness scenarios. I guess we've noticed that one before, kind of. Not LEYS so much as crossroads.
No, but we've talked about LEYS in their own episode before.
Yes, we have talked about LEYS, definitely. Quote, in earlier times, fairies, demons, and even human witches practicing their Black Sabbath rites chose gravel pits, garbage dumps, cemeteries, and crossroads for their appearances.
They chose garbage dumps?
Yeah.
They're putting those on ley lines?
Yeah. It says
Does that
Keel
make them,
anyway.
pollute more or less?
I just trust what Keel is saying, okay?
Yeah, I really like that there's probably a city hall meeting in every town where they put down the proposed site of the new dump, and then they put down one of those cellophane pieces of paper over top of it showing where the ley lines are and its connection to the Great Pyramids. Wow.
Yeah, I know. Modern hairy monsters and UFOs select the same sites. And quite a few UFO contacts have occurred near crossroads or on highways still under construction at points where old highways once intersected. Derenberger's first contact with Indrid Cold was on a newly completed highway yards from an old intersection. Across the river, the vast Indian mounds of Ohio stand as mute testimony as some earlier culture almost identical to the culture which constructed the Great Mounds of Great Britain. The latter were joined by straight tracks or LEYS, which formed a complicated grid system. I wonder if a similar ley grid may not have once existed in West Virginia, and I studied aerial photos and old maps looking for such a system. There are tiny traces here and there, but modern farmers and builders destroyed most of the old artifacts, just as they had destroyed a great many of mounds, stone towers, etc. that stood on this continent when the first Europeans arrived. Had Woody been stopped on the cross point of some old ley network? The only clue lies in Mr. Cold's uncharacteristic selection for a name. In his study of the British LEYS, The View Over Atlantis, John Mitchell said, we know who he is. Quote, from John Mitchell, within this quote, a peculiar feature of the old alignments is that certain names appear with remarkable frequency along their routes. Names with red, white, and black are common, so are cold or coal, Dodd, Mary, and Ley. End quote. It would be keeping with the twisted logic of the entities to call attention to a West Virginia ley system by staging their landings at specific points along the grid and adopting names like Colt. Just another note with this, he says that UFOs are common to be found hovering over buried gas lines. So I don't know, they like hovering over things.
Are we laying those on ley lines too?
Yeah.
Huh.
I mean, I don't know that he's connecting them with ley lines specifically, but the UFOs are likened to hover over them.
Okay.
I mean, if you name enough things, what are they not hovering over, you know?
Well, and they're usually hovering not just above the ground. They're not inches off the ground. So they can kind of technically be hovering over a large swath. And also I don't know, maybe back in the 60s it was different, but basically there's gas lines everywhere. You have to call to ask where they are if you're going to make a hole in the ground.
That's true.
Anywhere.
This would be hot on the heels of John Mitchell, his book coming out on LEYS, so he might have just been looking for a connection with LEYS because it doesn't go very far in the episode that we talked about. That being said, I wonder if there isn't something with crossroads, because did we do an episode on crossroads, or is it something we talked about doing?
They come up on a Halloween episode. I don't think it specifically has come up though as its own episode.
Yeah, I think there might be something to that, but this book is all about him, he might have just been throwing stuff to the wind and seeing what sticks. But I thought it an interesting thing, especially with the crossroads. So the next one, which I found very interesting, which I'm surprised I split up of mimics because this seems to be the same thing, which is doppelgangers and high strangeness, which could also fit under the Men in Black perhaps, as well as mimics, depending on what you think is going on. But here's part 2 instead of under mimics or Men in Black. Quote, north of Gallipolis, Ohio, I impulsively stopped at an isolated farmhouse one afternoon, and when I knocked on the door, a grim-faced man answered with a shotgun in his hands. I started to show my credentials and explain who I was, but he cut me short. Quote, I know who you are, he growled. We don't want anything to do with you. Get out of here. Like my dramatic reenactment? Don't answer. I know you loved it.
It's like I'm there, Chelsea. It's like I'm there.
Puzzled, I reported back to Mary Hyre, we'll talk about her later, and suggested that she visit the farm to see if she could find out the reason for the man's strange behavior. Next day we went back.
Did they check if there was a ley line? Apparently it's like everything.
No, probably just that one instance.
How do we have the room to like function so much on these ley lines? I always thought they were pretty thin.
I don't know. The next day we went back. I remained in the car while she talked with him for several minutes. Finally, they both came out to the car laughing. That. You're not going to believe this, but 10 minutes before you arrived here yesterday, I got a phone call. It sounded like a neighbor of mine, and he said he was calling to warn me about a crazy man, a real dangerous type, with a beard, that had just been to see him. 10 minutes later, you showed up. After you left, I called him back. He was out in the fields. Had been all day. His wife had to go get him, and he said he hadn't made that call. End quote from that guy. The farmer goes on to relay that he had an encounter a week prior to the visit from Keel in his back field that caused his cattle to run through an electric fence. The object left a 30-foot circle of scorched earth on the hillside. There's another encounter where Keel is visiting a contactee, and upon knocking on the contactee's door, he relays that he had literally just given a person that looked like him 5 minutes before all the information that Keel was asking for. So he had, in essence, showed up 5 minutes prior to his arrival. I didn't know where to stick this point, but entities can't seem to make sense of time, whether it's how we perceive it or exactly where they seem to be in our time. They'll say funny things like, I'll see you in time, or their dress will be out of style. I think it actually came up in the last episode with the Men in Black. Like, they'll say, like, 23 skidoo.
Yeah.
They just seem to not know whereabouts or how it worked. Contactees would often receive repeated telephone calls where there was no one there, or they would hear static or clicks. There's a real uncomfortable part of the book. I was uncomfortable anyway, where there seemed to be heavy breathing, and Keel, rest assured, lets us know it's definitely not heavy breathing of someone masturbating on the other end.
Good.
Which I felt was I felt it was an unnecessary detail anyhow in a UFO book.
It makes you worry about the rest of the book where he didn't mention that.
It really did. It really did. Remember when I said there is unnecessary sexual undertones? That was
no wonder he didn't.
Not sure why.
His metaphors and similes were not good.
Yeah.
Oh.
I don't know if he felt he was doing good research
The water,
by that, but
the water of the brook gently lapped against the rocks. Nothing at all like the sound of a man masturbating.
Yes. No. I could see how one might think that, but I ruled it out. What else? Okay, so the weird phones. There were many stories of footsteps. Well, not many. Okay, there is one story of footsteps on the roof, strange metallic clangings, or the sounds of car doors slamming outside the door when there were no cars in sight. And I just need to pause there. And it has nothing related to the story, I think, but it does make me think of our Bigfoot episode that we did because of the mimicry with Bigfoot. And there is a whole bunch of people that cited slamming car doors when they were at walk-in campsites, if you remember.
I do, yeah.
So I thought that was an interesting
I weirdly remember that more thoroughly than the last episode.
It's super creepy. That's why you remember it.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
I don't know. Sorry, Chelsea. I'm distracted. Right now, I just got, the movie, the Mothman Prophecy, which we've talked about. And that scene where Richard Gere's on the phone with Ingrid Cole. Yeah. I'm trying to remember if at any time in that phone call there was an awkward silence. I'm pretty sure Richard Gere doesn't ask at any time, are you masturbating? But I'm trying to think if that's where they were that part of this
Okay,
book
I
in.
did say not exactly like the book. I'm just going to try something out real quick. You tell me what this sounds like. Does it sound like I'm masturbating or no? Okay. Tell me, Injured Goals. Okay. One family reported that the hatch for the entrance of their attic had been mysteriously moved. That's a weird one. Bodiless voices.
Wait, they mean like it was left open when they didn't suspect it to be open, right? Not like the hatch was in a different location than where they were used to it being, right?
Oh, that's a good point. I took it as that it was moved, but it could be what you say.
Okay.
Now that you say that, that makes a little more sense.
I really feel like it's just the door was ajar or something, and they're like,
that
we
was
haven't been up there
literally
in
the
months.
wording that they used.
Okay.
So, yeah, it could be that it moved completely, or it was opened and they didn't open it. I put it in high strangeness because it probably, the whole thing moved on the roof.
Probably.
To a different location.
From
Probably.
from how they phrase that, yeah, it's the only natural conclusion.
Yeah, exactly. That's the conclusion I jumped to anyhow. Bodiless voices, if I didn't say that. One family heard someone walking on the roof. Oh shit, I put this again. They look out their window to see a man running through their backyard and just jumps clear over their fence.
Now, this does all take place around Christmas, right?
It takes place over like a year or so.
Okay. So it's not necessarily a Santa explanation there.
Oh.
Okay.
Large birds.
I feel like he just lands in a like general location and he's the one who's actually physically fit and he just bolts to like 50 houses and then comes back.
Probably. I mean, if you're a super athlete like that, why wouldn't you be running on the roofs of houses and shit? You know? I don't know. I'm not a super athlete like that. So, large birds, not Mothman, but there were large bird sightings. So, quote, is an example. George Wolfe Jr., 23, of Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania. He was out hunting when he came across a 7-foot-tall bird that looked something like an ostrich, end quote, in a cornfield. I'll leave you with that. Maybe I'll see what I can find for a future episode.
Isn't that the height roughly of an
Oh, hold
ostrich?
on. There was more. I don't know. I've never met one in real life. Actually, I did in Australia in the zoo. Didn't like it, though. I got out of there. The quote goes on, quote, I could see it dodging in and out among the trees, he said. It didn't leap over the brush like a deer would do, but it just zigzagged through the trees.
Okay.
Like an ostrich in a strange sideways motion.
Okay.
End quote.
That is, ostriches are 6'11" to 9 feet tall.
Okay, so it was exactly as tall as an ostrich. Wow. Don't I look stupid? There are also cattle mutilations mentioned in the book. I was going to read you a passage, but I feel like I've read enough passages and that about gets you the gist of it, that there is a cattle mutilation. Another big thing that happens throughout the book, and you kind of saw it with the doppelganger type thing, is chatter. I don't know that I'd really heard of this before. It may be exclusive to Keel. It might not be, because I haven't read a lot of ufologists. What do they call it?
Ufologists, you got it right.
I don't know if this is something that is quite common to happen to them or not. This is the first time I kind of heard of it. So, Keel experiences throughout this book is chatter, and that's being that he receives various messages all over the place, from entities through contactees where they're told to pass on a message to Keel, as well as Men in Black type entities providing him with messages. The chatter starts slowly in the book, but by the end, Keel is receiving so many different messages, and it seems whatever it is that's causing all this chatter is always one step ahead. These entities are predicting things. Some come true, some things are really off. At what point he gets a message saying that the Pope was going to be assassinated by a man dressed in black in the Middle East on a certain date. The date comes and goes with no such incident, but at a later date, actually not too far away, the Pope did have an attempted assassination in Southeast Asia by a man dressed in all black. So they got the date a little wrong, so maybe you can explain it away by they're probably fucking with them. It's super strange, actually, what's going on with it. Keel had received a message that the grid would go down during the president lighting the Christmas tree, I believe it was. This one, I don't have the exact page reference, but Keel leaves town with a trunk full of water. And the day comes and goes, nothing happens, and he ends up meeting with a contactee after the fact, and the contactee says that an entity had told Keel something like, I'll help you drink all that water, or something. So just another interesting part of the book. It would be interested to know if other ufologists have something similar that would happen to them. Another theme of the book is overwhelming fear. In the book, Keel walks through areas where he has an overwhelming sense of dread with seemingly no explanation. He goes back during the day and can attribute it to any types of wires, electric boxes, etc. Typical, but I thought it deserved a mention nonetheless. It's not really a theme, it's kind of a theory that he puts forth in the book, is that people will see what they can handle. So that would be how contactees appear to certain people, how UFOs
human but kind of off.
Yeah, how UFOs will appear to people. Keel has a theory that whatever this phenomenon is, that it will appear to you as something that you can make sense of. So basically the strange things appearing differently are appearing different to different people when encountering the same thing. When they're looking at the same thing, it can appear different. Hence why you get different encounters.
Does that not kind of cover for anyone where they've given contradictory evidence as to a story that they're telling? Like if two people,
so. Yeah.
Could that not also be attributed to them lying and making sure they're telling the same story?
Yeah, I guess it could. Yeah, it could be that. I could see that happening. I could see it being a psychological effect where people would shape something.
I could just as easily see him not wanting to throw out investigations that he's done because they were full of shit.
Maybe. It's definitely a theory, too. Or whether it's a psychological thing where people mentally see what they can handle, or it's just a part of this paranormal aspect that it appears as what.
Yeah, it could also just be the byproduct of leading questions that he's been asking. He'll ask the different leading questions and take them different paths for people who had the same experience.
I would say that whether or not he's asking leading questions, yes. I would say that's probably a thing that does happen with encounters where you don't know what you're seeing because you can't make sense of what it is in, everyday life. So your brain kind of tries to make up for that, to try and make sense of it, even it's something that's so
That's a fair point, but we also have a bunch of caveats already with Keel. So, him writing off the fact that people are giving different stories for the same encounter. I don't know. He seems like a lazy investigator and he's just gonna go with it.
Yeah. What's the next one? Phone interference. I thought I already talked about it. I'm gonna go on with it because this is something that I didn't include up there when I was talking about phone interference. Right. So one person was having a conversation with somebody on the phone and someone comes on the line and says, quote, "Wake up down there," end quote. Another where they answered the phone and it's just someone talking really fast, like a tape recorder on fast forward. Nothing huge or anything, but I find it kind of interesting. Maybe. It's not the most interesting thing in the book, but here we are. And last thing on the Mothman Prophecies, as far as themes go, this isn't a theme, but hey, I have to throw in a Canadian sighting for no good reason. A woman living alone on an isolated island north of Vancouver, BC, Canada, has two curious encounters with the same kind of beings. She had moved into a tiny one-room cabin on Keats Island, October 1967, and was soon seeing UFO lights nightly. On January 29, 1968, following a close sighting of a long dark body with dumb red and yellow lights at both ends, she was surprised by two visitors. Both wore neat dark coveralls and claimed to be employees of the hydroelectric company. They offered to help her put up a stovepipe. The younger of the two climbed on the roof of her cabin while the other handed him the pipes. I could hear the man on the ground directing him, and the one on the roof would answer, "Yes, master." After the pipe was installed, the employees joined her for tea. They seemed a little stiff. When they left, she wondered how they had known she was there because the cabin couldn't be seen from the road, and the stove was out when they arrived, so there was no smoke from the chimney. On May 2nd, she again encountered two men. One was the boss, Hydro Man, in his neat coveralls, she reported. The other was a different younger man, about 19 to 20. As I entered the path, the boss man indicated with his hand for the young man to get behind him. They got well off the path and waited for me, the young man a little behind his boss. The fellow stared at me as if I was some kind of freak. This time she didn't invite them for tea. One odd thing she noticed during both meetings was their slow, careful way of walking. They looked at their feet and stepped very uncertainly. The next day, a jeep came along the road containing 4 men inspecting lines. Carelessly dressed, workaday men, none in coveralls. The boss wasn't obviously so. They expressed no surprise at seeing me there, no concern of any particular interest. I told them 2 of their men had already been around the day before inspecting lines. They assured me yesterday's men weren't Hydro men, that someone had been pulling my leg. End quote. So there you have it.
Not just pulling their leg. They had a slave situation going on.
Yeah, they did, master. Mothman Prophecies in a nutshell. Criticism, you ask? Why? In May/June of 2002, an issue of Skeptical Inquirer, journalist John C. Sherwood, a former business associate of UFO researcher Gray Barker, published an analysis of private letters between Keel and Barker during the period of Keel's investigation. In the article, Gray Barker's Book of Bunk, Sherwood reported finding significant differences between what Keel wrote at the time of his investigation and what he wrote in his first book about the Mothman reports, raising questions about the book's accuracy. Sherwood also reported that Keel, who was well known for writing humorous and outrageous letters to friends and associates, would not assist him with clarifying the differences. Just to comment on this, I think this goes along with my comment about the storytelling aspect of a lot of accounts he includes in his book. It is obvious that he's added embellishments, at the very least. Keel does ask leading questions. It's clear right in his book where he says, quote, "Finally I asked him if he had ever had any really odd encounters with peculiar strangers." End quote. A little bit leading. So those are the criticisms. I'll say, I said it in the last one, I find the book entertaining. I'm going to reread it. I'm actually just listening to the audiobook for the follow-up to the Mothman Prophecies, which is The Eighth Tower. Kind of dry. I'm going to see if it gets better. One other thing, well, a couple other things that I feel like need to be covered in this episode with the Mothman and John Keel is Mary Hyre, who, frankly, I put more faith in. The real reporter who worked with Keel, she made a lot of appearances through the Mothman Prophecies. She is the primary source for documented Mothman sightings. And just to give you an idea of who Mary is in the grand scheme of things, I found a lengthy article about her after her passing. I'm just going to read it. In Athens, Ohio, a reporter for the Athens Messenger, she was the acting manager at their sister office on 6th Street in downtown Point Pleasant. Mary Hyre had several strange incidences relating to the Mothman. Hyre is credited with being one of the first reporters to cover the Mothman story. During the Mothman and UFO sightings in Point Pleasant, Mary Hyre would often report the strange occurrences in her newspaper column called, quote, "Where the Waters Mingle," end quote. As a result, John Keel and Mary Hyre became associated together out of mutual interest in the paranormal happenings in Point Pleasant, and would later join with John Keel to investigate the strange reports coming out of this small town. Mary Hyre had her own run-ins with the Men in Black, UFO sightings and strange happenings, and made many appearances alongside with John Keel in his book. She was often relentless in her endeavors to report the strange phenomenon going on in Point Pleasant. Some believe this led to the strange men in black paying her regular scheduled visits to her office in attempts of putting a stop to her releasing newspaper reports. In January 1967, Hyre was working late in her office when a short man with odd eyes covered by thick glasses and a black mop of hair in the fashion of a bowl cut asked Hyre and her circulation manager for directions to Welsh, West Virginia. The man became increasingly more awkward as their conversation progressed, leaving mid-conversation after stealing a pen and laughing maniacally as he exited the building. Hyre
laughing maniacally.
It's not spelt that way, but okay. Hyre swears that she saw the same man in Athens jump into a black van that had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. Later on, she would also hear rumors that men in black were going to witnesses to get them to stop spreading the Mothman tale. Hyre, still a reporter in Athens, was approached again by a stranger asking her not about the bridge or the disaster itself, but about the reported UFO sightings that happened shortly before the bridge collapsed. This man reportedly visited several witnesses concerning the UFO sightings, claiming to be from Cambridge, Ohio. However, some witnesses claim this man didn't know the location of Columbus, despite the two areas being relatively close in proximity. Mary Hyre died at 54 years of age and had worked for the Athens Messenger for 27 years. She was dedicated to her family, her career, her hometown, and to her interest of paranormal occurrences happening in Point Pleasant.
I find it so odd that
Keel
made that statement that like everybody's going to see something that they're able to like compute, that they're able to process.
Yeah.
If that's the case, you can't see the same, like everybody's seeing the same entity.
That's true. When there actually wouldn't be encounters where everybody did see the same thing, which we've covered in this in the podcast. Remember that school in Africa where all the kids like saw the same thing? So technically, maybe they could only all handle the same thing.
Yeah, but like I just don't foresee, like,
I don't know.
They're both saying, like, using as evidence that seeing different things at the same time and seeing something consistently as evidence of proof of something, which, I don't know, those are contradictory viewpoints in my mind. You can't hold both.
Yeah, I agree.
Also, I just want to note, they just said odd eyes, and this is from, like, the 60s, so I'm wondering, like, what kind of euphemism that was.
Probably racist.
Yeah, I know, but just, like, what race? I don't know.
There is some language used in this book that is not necessary. I don't know. It would be borderline racist today, I think. And you don't hear people cite skin color the way that they just so loosey-goosey did back then. And there's a few parts in the book where I feel really awkward. One of them is when he's talking about the heavy breathing definitely not being masturbation. The other is how frequently race comes up. So yeah, that's Mary Hyre. And now we're nearing the end, and I'm going to wrap this episode up by reading a few of Mary Hyre's newspaper articles from, that place that she worked at, Athens. Creature sighted in daylight. Mason monster spotted again. And Mary Hyre, Point Pleasant correspondent. Point Pleasant. The Mason's monster made its daylight debut on Friday morning, adding Tom Urry, 25, Clarksburg, to its list of endorsees. Quote, I never saw anything like it. I was so frightened I just couldn't go to work today. This thing had a wingspan every bit of 10 feet. This is right from the newspaper. 10 feet, maybe. It could be a bird, but I surely never saw one like it. End quote. The former Point Pleasant resident commented, oh, he moved right out of Point Pleasant. Urry sighted the creature at 7:15 a.m. Friday while driving toward Clarksburg on Route 62. When he reached the vicinity of the Homer Smith farm, about 8 miles north of Point Pleasant, he saw the creature rise up just like a helicopter from a nearby field. He told Millard Halstead, Chief Deputy Sheriff, that the creature hovered over his automobile, traveling at approximately 70 miles an hour, then flew toward the Ohio River from a point near Kirkland Memorial Garden, near the TNT area, near the spot of other sightings. Quote, I was scared to death this thing would come right through my convertible top, end quote, Uri said. Uri was the first person to see the thing during daylight. The creature was first sighted on November 13 by Mr. and Mrs. Roger Scarberry and Mr. and Mrs. Steve Millette, all of Point Pleasant. They reported that the creature hovered over their car at speeds of up to 100 miles an hour. They described the creature as having a man-like body, a 10-foot wingspan, and red eyes approximately 2 inches in diameter and about 6 inches apart. Several other Mason County residents have also reported seeing the creature. A Point Pleasant fireman said today that an out-of-state family reported seeing the creature on Thursday night near Crodel Park, Point Pleasant. The most recent sighting discounts the possibility that the creature is a sandhill crane. Dr. Robert Smith, biologist at West Virginia University, offered the crane theory. But an Ohio University biologist replied that sandhill cranes have never been known to migrate near this area, and they seldom stay long in a single location. Is the thing really a crane or other large bird? Is it a creature from outer space? Is it a resurrected pterodactyl? Listed in geology texts as an extinct flying reptile of the Jurassic period? Whatever it is, the creature has convinced another friend motorist that it isn't a figment of their imagination. There's more, but I think this is a good place to leave it at. Now, I've consumed a lot of Mothman information during the last little bit in preparation for this episode, and there's no way I could ever include everything on it. You got my filter on it and what I found interesting and important. I listened to podcasts, interviews, documentaries. I read The Silver Bridge by Gray Barker, which came out prior to Keel's book about the Mothman in Point Pleasant. I read Visitors from Lanulos, which is Woodrow Derenberger's book regarding Indra Cold and his interactions with the Lanulonians, I guess they would go by. It's been a lot. I went in not expecting to like Keel, and while I didn't necessarily like his writing style, I can get behind the pieces he was trying to put together. I mean, I wouldn't say it was well, but I could get behind it. It's the kind of things I like. I would highly recommend the read. Don't go in with expectations. I do intend to also read more, and I'm going to read it again. The thing about Mothman that I don't get is what was up with this flap. Like, why was it happening so much and then it just dwindled? And that being said, there's still a few sightings here and there around there, but I don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me.
And I do have to wonder if the sightings around there are now just due to the lore of the region. It being that, like, something unexplained, you can imagine in your mind it's the Mothman because it is regionally known. It's not even just regional. It's like internationally known for it. Yeah.
That can't be discounted. But there's still...
No, and just coincidentally enough, Keel shows up just in time for like the only flap that ever happens of this thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's other people who witnessed it. It did happen.
Oh, yeah.
Mary Hyre, for one. Gray Barker wrote a book on it. It happened.
But you do have to wonder how much of Keel being there and the work that he did plays a role in how it did end up the way it did.
Probably. I think it has a lot to do with the movie that came out. Probably. I don't know, because there's places in the United States that one cryptid sighting is like all they have. So they have, their little statues there as well. So, I mean, I think that definitely plays into, like, psyches of people when they're there. Mothman is still alive and well in Illinois. And I find it super strange.
Moth person.
Yeah, right. Fuck. There is a theory, and it's not proven or anything. It's just one that I came across floating around out there in the ethos, which is that it could potentially have been some sort of military experiment type situation, because during the war there was either in Point Pleasant or very close some sort of, I don't know if it was like something important that they used during the war. I don't know if it was weapons or a base of some sort, but there nonetheless. I'm so sorry. Like, send us an email or comment or something if you know what it was. But there is something there. So it is floated out there that it could have potentially been some sort of experiment. It does seem to get linked with the TNT area, which maybe it's like, I don't know. The thing that keeps bringing me back to try and make sense of is like, why was it so concentrated for this short period of time? It doesn't make sense to me. And yeah, there's UFO flaps and stuff like that, but this seems...
But they're consistent. Different. This is a unique creature. This is a unique circumstance.
It's different. And the fact that there's still sightings of Mothman, but he just kind of went away. What drew him there? And that's why I said in the last episode, I think the collapse of the Silver Bridge just kind of ties it up nicely for people. I don't think Mothman had anything to do with that.
Yeah.
I think it just, like in our brain, we
talked
need
about,
something.
yeah. And Keel needed something too.
It wasn't just Keel, because
I know.
Gray Burke's book is called The Silver Bridge.
I know. But at the same time, I'm attributing probably more than I should that Keel's kind of what pushed this to what it is.
Well, yeah, because of the Mothman Prophecies.
And he's the name that
movie.
you know attached to it, yeah. So in my mind,
yeah.
the work that he did on this and the fact that he wanted to get a big story out of it is how we ended up with it the way it is.
Yeah, I guess in the end, like, you could only hope that you get a book and then, Richard Gere plays you in a movie. So I don't know what
your masturbating scenes. You actually had to leave a lot of money on the table for them to not include that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of the stuff happened. I think you have to take some of the stuff he says with a grain of salt, just because he didn't seem to have any experience going into it with investigating types of things like this. That being said, people had experiences and stuff, but he's connecting the lines in random ways. And yeah, it's a good, entertaining read. I love high strangeness, so yeah.
Awesome. Well, Chelsea, thank you for that. And I think this
you're
is
welcome.
Very rare circumstances where we leave this, not necessarily with him being a true UFO community asshole.
Yeah, it's strange, right?
I think this is a different level.
I don't put him to asshole. I put him to... I haven't filed him yet.
I almost feel like once we do their episode, Chelsea, I do think he's going to be around where I'm going to put Linda Moulton out.
I really feel... I just get the feels that she's going to come out an asshole.
Yeah, that's fair.
Unfortunately. So I think that it just in feeling it out there and what I've heard of her coming up that I've tried to ignore, I feel like he's gonna come out better than her.
Well, I guess stay tuned to see. I feel like at the end of one of these years, we have to do a ranking of the assholes that we've done.
Yeah, we do. Okay, Dodie's at the top.
See, I don't think we do it right now. Like I said, I think this is an episode that we do at some point.
Okay, fine.
That's right, I'm spoiling your
Maybe.
fun. Plus, you got a David Walk episode. Go watch.
You're always fucking spoiling my fun. Yeah, David Wilcox live. He's probably not live anymore.
He goes for 4 hours at a time. He's still live.
He's still live.
Yeah, I have been Taylor here with Chelsea.
Go.
We are Journey to the Fringe. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Journey to the Fringe. If you have liked what you have listened to, please like, share, subscribe, or follow, depending on what venue you are listening to us through. Also, please, if possible, leave a 5-star review, as that really helps us in the algorithms. Should you wish to interact with us, please check us out on your social media of choice. I bet you we are there. And if you really want to communicate with us and give us ideas for new episodes, or tell us that we're wrong and terrible, either way, please send us an email at journeytothefringe@gmail.com. For now, I'll see you in the next episode.